mindset. And I tell these people, hey, you just have to refuse to accept anything less than success. I mean, it's not even an option for you. You get it done, you figure out how to make it happen. I mean, you have to just will it into existence. And then obviously success breeds success over time. You know, when you overcome some sort of obstacle, you know, you say, well, I've done it before, I can continue to do it. So, I mean, it's good to start that habit as a young person. And again, your mind tells you when you're quit, but it also tells you when to get started.
You're listening to The Hot Wash by Born Primitive Tactical. I'm Bruno Fallon. I've spent my 4-decade career in some of the most elite units in the United States Special Operations community, where I learned that elite operators aren't made overnight. They're forged through hardship, discipline, and relentless drive. In each episode, I sit down with the most accomplished and innovative leaders in special operations, industry, coaching, and athletes of all disciplines. Let's jump right in. All right, everybody, welcome back to The Hot Wash by Born Primitive Tactical. I'm still your host, haven't been fired yet. And we've actually got a guest on here today that I'll admit I'm a fanboy of, and I'm not a fanboy of many people, but everybody knows I'm a human performance guy. Dr. Shawn Baker, welcome.
Hey, Bruno, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I got to tell you, I mean, I was up in DC yesterday and there's a bunch of National Guard guys hanging out there. And, you know, I used to be I just like that vibe. I just like being around people that get it, perform, that are, you know, locked in, I suppose.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
And if you don't know about Shawn's resume, I'm going to cover briefly, but we're going to talk about it. This is why he's a perfect guest for us here. You know, started out, did a pump in Afghanistan as a trauma surgeon in orthopedics. And everybody knows that's the ugliest side of war right there that you got to see. You have been basically the authority on the carnivore diet, and as far as I'm concerned, everybody out there. And the thing I want to point out is for everybody that's on Instagram that's following, you know, carnivore diets and all these fad diets and stuff that are not administered by a MD nutritionist and properly trained. The main reason I have him on here is if you've actually listened to what he says, read his books, you understand the full spectrum of what you're doing in the carnivore diet. And that's what I really like is there are some things you can be hit and miss on, and you get the performance side of it. And then the cool part is, and my most favorite part is we're very close in age.
Mm-hmm.
You're 59, I'm 60. I mean, you're a very accomplished athlete too, Highland Games, powerlifting records. I believe you've got a over 50s powerlifting record that's still standing.
Well, no, for powerlifting, I kind of stopped doing that in my 40s.
Okay.
So I've got world records in concept too. I've broken a bunch of those records, and I'm now transitioning into more track and field type stuff. So
awesome.
I'm like looking towards a decathlon, believe it or not. So
really?
That should be fun. Yeah.
So we're big fans of the concept too. Greg's a friend of mine. Matter of fact, we've got in the box here, and we're getting ready to do an unboxing, and I've already worked out and wants the strength erg. Okay. I don't know if you've messed with that yet.
I have not. I've seen it. You talking about Greg from Concept 2?
Yes.
Yeah. He and I talk on social media every once in a while. Yeah.
So I will tell you the new strength erg. It is a different animal. I saw it out at the Tactical Games National Championship. They were having the athletes do, I think it was 90 seconds on the row, 90 seconds on the bench press, 90 seconds on the leg press with a 90-second rest in between. And by far, it was the most destructive thing I saw physically on anybody there. Everybody was rolling on the ground, done. So me being a Concept 2 guy between the rower, and the skier, I was like, oh yeah, whatever. Well, Greg put me on it. And I immediately got an asthma check on, okay, this thing is no joke. What's really different about it, unlike the rowers, where once you get in your cadence, this, as you get in your cadence, increases the load on you. Mm. And it gets more and more difficult. And you can do some adjustments and everything, but there's no doubt that when you're doing all three, that it's a total body workout beyond any words. So you definitely got to check that one out.
Yeah, I'd love to try that. That looks fun. Yeah.
So let's talk from the beginning, and I'm real curious. So, medical doctor in Afghanistan, and I mean, you saw the horrors of war. is that what also led you into human performance, or were you kind of coexisting in that already?
No, I mean, I've been an athlete since I was a little kid. I mean, kind of like you. I started lifting weights when I was 13. At 8, when I remember watching Bruce Jenner when the 76 decathlon when I was a little kid, and I was kind of inspired. I remember I sort of had the neighborhood Olympics that had all the kids, right? All the kids on the block would go in there, and we did, kind of a semi-Olympics. And so I was always into sports my whole life. I was never like a really, really good athlete, though. I mean, I was always, okay. I worked hard, and I bloomed athletically quite late. I mean, I played professional rugby in my 20s after I got out of college. So I was in medical school in Texas, and I was working out at a gym. It was called Sergeant Rock's Gym in Galveston, Texas. Guy who ran his name was Paul McCartney. So wasn't from the Beatles, but he was a chiropractor. And Paul, he said, "Hey, dude, if you want to keep working out in my gym, you got to come play rugby for us." Because I was this tall guy. I was pretty athletic, pretty strong dude. And so I started playing rugby. And so I ended up, just for whatever reason, being pretty good. Made the all Texas team, made the all Western US team, got recruited to play professionally in New Zealand. And so I was in medical school, and I just punched. I said, I'm going to drop out of medical school, go play rugby, which is, I could make that decision. I was like 20, I don't know, I was 23 at the time or something like that. So that was fun. Did that for about 7 years. And then I joined the military, because when I came back to the US, I still wanted to play, but this is in the early 90s, and the US didn't really have much going on as far as rugby was concerned, where you could play at a high level, but you could do it in the military. The military had a pretty decent program. So I went back in, I was kind of had a degree. I went in as an officer, did the officer, candidate stuff. And then I ended up playing for the Armed Forces team. And so that was, fun. And then my day job was, launching nukes. I was a missile air guy. Then I got kind of sick of doing that. And I was like, I want to go back to medical school. So I got the military to, help pay for the rest of the way through. Went back to medical school, graduated, with honors, ended up going into orthopedics. And then
how old were you when you graduated medical school?
I was, God, how old? Let me think. I was probably 34, I think, something like that.
That's pretty incredible, though, to go play professional rugby that long, come back in, be in a nuclear tech position, and then still get in medical school in your early 30s.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of funny. I remember I had to go back. This is a kind of funny. So I was in college. I went to University of Texas, and I had 4.0, really good grades, except my senior year, because I'd already gotten medical school, and I was like, screw it. I'm just going to screw it. So my GPA dropped, but I was already in medical school. So then I had to reapply, and my GPA wasn't where I wanted to be. So I had to go back and take a bunch of classes at the University of Wyoming to bring it back up. So I was working as a nuclear missile launch officer, and then I was taking all these correspondence courses. I was knocking out like 30, 40 hours of classes in one semester. Got my GPA back up, got back into medical school, and then just had a lot of fun with that. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun being a surgeon. It was a good, cool job, except for the fact that the healthcare system is just broken. I mean, we just prioritize the wrong thing. Our incentives are perverse, quite honestly. It's basically to keep you a customer and not get you healthy.
Yeah, there's no disagreement here. I just had elbow surgery, and my orthopedic surgeon is a guy like us. And he looked at me, and he even said to me, he goes, "Do you want pain meds?" I'm like, "Dude, I don't do opioids. I'll deal with it on my own." And he's like, I kind of knew the answer before I asked you, but it's set up. And just so you know, the one I'll really go on a tangent is the veterans medical side of it. I mean, we just recently did a thing at Born Primitive where we cleared $34 million in veterans distressed medical debt with Black Rifle Coffee. Why do veterans have medical debt in the first place? Right? I mean,
yeah.
And the whole system is messed up. I signed a contract when I went in that said if I did 20 years, I had free medical and dental for life. Well, I'll tell you, I mean, you went 30 years, and I am paying premiums, I'm paying copays, and I have to have my own vision and dental insurance on top of that. So it is a farce, right?
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I worked a little bit in the VA system, because I was active duty, and we would sometimes do some stuff at the VA, and it is so ungodly inefficient, for one. I mean, it was just like, as a surgeon, I used to hate going over there. Not that I dislike veterans, but it was just like in private practice, I could do 5 or 6 surgeries in a day. At the VA, I was lucky if I could do 2, just because everybody they were kind of like, retired on active duty folks, just kind of hanging out,
Slow
punching
rolling.
the clock, and it was just such a frustrating experience. And so it's sad because, obviously, veterans are people who have given, tremendous sacrifices, and to sort of make those promises and then deliver sort of half-assed is not a good way to do it.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I do know something we're attacking here. Our co-founder and CEO, Bear, is actually engaging Congress, engaging the VA. The one thing we're attacking, we did $11 million in 2024. 2025, we did $34 million with Black Rifle. Bear has made the challenge, and we're going to bring in some private equity and some other businesses. But since this is our country's 250th anniversary, we are going to open it up to first responders as well, but we're going to attempt to raise $250 million in medical debt and pay it off.
Good for you.
And it's one of those things too, where I think the only people making out right now is Big Pharma and the insurance companies, because when I talk to you guys in your business, the doctors, they're not getting compensated like everybody else. So, but in your time, as a Air Force doc, you did a pump to Afghanistan. I believe you were over there when there was a mass casualty event that happened. And kind of talk about being a surgeon overseas. And I mean, again, that's so far out of my expertise. We expect if we get stitched up to have a guy like you do it.
Yeah. So I went. I had my only deployment. I had another one they canceled. It was kind of interesting. They I was not supposed to go. Somebody wasn't unable to go, and so they sent me, and I was happy to go, obviously. And I was out at Kirtland Air Force Base out in New Mexico. They sent me out there. Another guy, he was actually out here in Virginia. He was in he was in North Carolina, Tom Large. Anyway, we met out there, flew into, went through Manas in Kyrgyzstan, and then down into Bagram. Get there. We took it over from the Army, so they were transitioning the hospital from the Army to the Air Force. And I remember day one, and I'd done my surgical residency. We see some trauma. You see gunshots, car wrecks. We had a refinery explosion, train crash. You see some decent stuff, but you got there and it was day one. I remember there was a special operator from Canada, both knees gone. Stepped on a landmine or something like that, and that was like,
wake up call.
It's
right?
like, this is real, and it was like that pretty much every day for the 6 months I was there. It was nonstop, always trauma. I mean, we ran that OR, as much as we possibly could, and we would try to make Sundays the day where we wouldn't schedule surgeries because, when someone has a blast injury, they're very, very dirty injuries, and then some of the like suicide IED guys would put a bunch of dirt and feces and stuff in there to make the injuries worse. So the infection rates are horrible. So you're having to constantly go in and wash out the wounds before you can close it. And so we would always, kind of like schedule that stuff during the week, and then Sunday was the down day. But we always had trauma. We'd always have fresh trauma. So like you never had a day off. And I mean, the biggest event we had was that mass casualty when Vice President at the time, Dick Cheney, came. And I guess the Taliban got wind that he was coming, and so they wanted to attempt to assassinate him. And they couldn't, he couldn't get past the gate, obviously. And so they ended up blowing up, like, I think it was like 40 or 50 people that blew up and killed like 25. We had about 25, really bad casualties come in. And this is a tiny little two-room OR. We were in a, it was a tin roof, wooden building, right? And so we're running that as fast as it can on. I remember we worked like 40 hours straight. And I was there as an orthopedic guy, so I'm fixing bones, right? And the general surgeons are in there doing all the real life-saving stuff. So when anybody gets like a belly wound, they're bleeding. That's how they bleed to death. So we were in there helping those guys. So we're in there, stopping bleeding internally. And it was like, I remember this because Tom and I were looking at each other, and we worked like 12 hours stabilizing everybody. And then we had, everybody on base was in there. There was almost been 500 people helping out. And then as that started to die down, then it was like, okay, now it's time to do all the orthopedic stuff. And then everyone was gone.
And now you're still working.
So we're still working for like 40 hours straight. I remember I was exhausted after that.
I'll bet.
That was just
crazy time. It's a way different type of stress than what we experience as special operators. One of the things I always talk about, we talk about what used to be everything we wiped under the rug of PTSD, but now it's a very open topic. And I would imagine, just like I think you see here in trauma centers, 911 operators, firefighter, paramedics, I would imagine that after your 6-month pump there, that you were ready to get the fuck away from the gore and that daily routine and get back to a little bit of, civil life, right?
Yeah, yeah. It was, it was a good experience in a way as a surgeon because you learn how to think on your feet. It was like, in the US, if I'm, fixing someone's femur or something like that, and I need it, I put in a, stainless steel or a titanium screw and I need it to be 44 millimeters. Yeah, they got them. Over there, they're like, yeah, we got like a 22 and a 60, doc. Which one do you want? There's no resupply. So it was like figuring out how to make stuff happen and just, we literally ran out of saline one time. And we're like, how do you run out of saline? Yeah, we ran out of saline. So, yeah, it was a good experience from that side, but it was, it was day to day, all day long, depressing, gore. Get little kids in there. We had a lot of pediatric kids that were injured. And so that was just something that you kind of warn. So you got to, you develop this gallows humor stuff. You have to,
right?
As you probably experienced,
right?
You got to just like, this is so crazy. The best you can do is laugh about it. So
you paired up with that one surgeon.
Yeah,
I mean, do you guys still stay in touch?
Yeah, we do. Yeah,
that's cool. Because there's something to be said about serving in war with somebody in times like that.
Yeah.
And I think my closest brotherhood relationships are people that I've served with overseas. So that's kind of cool. So you come back now to the States and where's your head? What's on the plate for you? Coming out of that, it's got to be a hard reset.
Well, I mean, I actually did fairly well. I mean, I can't say I developed any PTSD or anything like that. I mean, but it was definitely a reacclimation process. My first child was a baby when I left. I came back and he didn't recognize me. He's a little boy now, and unfortunately, my wife and I ended up splitting up. I think some of the military stuff probably contributed, as you probably
as I know
can know about that. Yep. So anyway, I kind of reintegrated back into life. I finished out the rest of my time in the military, and the day-to-day civilian military practice is pretty. It's pretty easy. It's quite honestly, it's pretty simple. It's just when you get deployed is when you really kind of have to get after it. And so then I transitioned into private practice, became the head of a big orthopedic group, did that for several years. And then I just kind of found this nutritional angle and started to really start to think about lifestyle more and started to become a little bit more jaded with the healthcare system, because when I started seeing patients improving significantly just by dietary changes where they didn't need surgery, I was excited about that because I had done thousands of operations. I didn't get a thrill out of like doing another knee scope or another knee replacement. I was like, this is really cool. We can get you to a point where maybe you don't need surgery. And to find out that the hospital administration where I was working at wasn't particularly excited about that because it was lost revenue for those guys. Because
right.
they, I'm sure most people know, even nonprofit hospitals depend upon a lot of revenue. And that's how, and the orthopedic department, interventional cardiology department, the oncology department where they're doing all the chemo drugs, that's where they make all their money, is to support the psychiatry and the pediatrics department. So they want you to grind and do as many surgeries as possible. And if you stop and say, hey, let's maybe cancel some surgeries and feed people better, that doesn't go over well. I found out the hard way.
I'll bet. So you start to develop, how did you make this transition? Because how did you decide to become like literally the authority on the carnivore diet? Where did that come into play?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was something that, I was probably, where was I? I was, in my early 40s, and as I mentioned, I've been an athlete my whole life, professional rugby. I was a Highland Games world champion. I was a world champion, concept 2 guy. Been doing it, ever since I've been a kid. And I was noticing probably 42, 43, I was walking around about 285, strong as, I deadlifted close to 800 pounds at my top. Strong guy. I still run his sprints, all that stuff. It's still, I could dunk a basketball at 290,
right.
Even in my 40s. And then I was just realizing that starting to develop metabolic disease. I got sleep apnea. I just don't feel that good. So I was like, I got to just dial it down. I got to get down. So I'd gotten through a divorce and I was like, well, fuck, I got to get lean, So I dropped down from about 285, 290 to 230 in about 3 months. I just I mean,
that's a huge drop.
It was a huge drop.
Yeah.
It was fast. And
Yeah.
I mean, but I was working out 3 times a day. I mean, I'd get up in the morning. I was still working as a full-time as a surgeon. I'd get up about 4 o'clock in the morning, a couple thousand jump ropes, go to work on a clinic day. On my lunch hour, I'd lift. And then I'd come home, put my kids to bed, 9, 10 o'clock, and I'd do another couple thousand jump ropes and on repeat. And then I also dramatically cut the amount of volume I was eating because, I mean, I was 280. I could easily put down 6,000, 7,000 calories a day. I mean, it was routine for me to go to a restaurant, 2 appetizers, a couple entrees, and a dessert or 2. I mean, that was just all the time. So when I dramatically dropped my calories, dramatically increased my output, I of course lost weight. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, that does work if you can do it. And I got down to 230, and the nurses said, "Doc, we like the fat Dr. Baker a hell of a lot better because you're an asshole now." 'Cause I was hungry and pissed off,
Hangry all the time, right? You are the Snickers commercial.
Yeah. So I was just like, I can't maintain this forever. So then I kind of sort of fell into and this was like a low fat, heavy vegetable, lean protein, a bodybuilding diet typically, which, it works, it gets you lean, but it was not something that was imminently, ultimately sustainable for me. So then this is when the paleo diet was starting to come out, and you got these element things that my friend Rob Wolf, he's co-founder of this company there. So I adopted a paleo diet, felt a little bit better, ended up going low carb, and then even on a ketogenic diet for a while. And then the first time I went on a ketogenic diet, I noticed that my hunger was pretty non-existent, which was a new thing for me. I had never experienced that. I'm not hungry. Good. That's weird. I was like, wow, that's not normal for me. So I did that for a while. And then I started just kind of getting more interested in nutrition just in general. This is about 15 years ago. And then I somehow stumbled on this group of wacky, crazy people eating only meat. They called it zero-carb. And I'm like, what the F is this? This is nuts, right? And they were in there, they were presenting some reasonably compelling evidence, some clear, obvious photographic evidence, some interesting stuff, and some theoretical stuff on why this may or may not work. And so I said, hell, I'll just try it for a couple. I'll try it for the heck of it, see what happens. Because I was interested in athletic performance. And this is when I kind of started hopping on that concept too. And I had, at 49, I broke the 40 plus American record for like 500 meters. I don't know if you've ever done like a 500 meters. Oh, yeah. It's a pretty intense event.
It's a sprint.
It's a sprint, right? So it's definitely a sprint. And I was like, okay, I went in 2016, I adopted this all meat approach. I said, I'll just do it for 30 days, see how I feel. And, at that time I'd had some mileage, professional rugby, Highland Games, powerlifting, all that stuff, you beat up a little bit. I had my aches and pains. And I go carnivore. And within about 2 months, I noticed that nothing really hurts. And I was like, well, this is pretty cool. As an orthopedic surgeon, I had this quadricep tendonitis in my right knee that I had for 10 years. I remember I think I was squatting 500 pounds. I think I kind of partially tore my quad tendon. And I'd always just had a little bit of pain there. And it was like, if I sit in a car for a long time, pain. And that just went away. And all of a sudden I could jump again. I could sprint again. I can start, I can train legs.
And no other changes other than the nutrition.
No changes other than the diet. And I was like, this is really cool. So then I get, I'm back on the rowing machine, still going. And I remember, you may understand some stuff. So my 500 meter time at that time when I turned 49 was, I want to say 117 or something like that, which is pretty fast.
That's fast.
That was the American record.
Yeah.
When I turned 50, I got that number down to 114. And the world record at the time was 118. So I beat the world record by 4 seconds.
Which is
on carnivore.
4 seconds is a big gap.
That's a huge gap at that, for that. So I was like, wow, there's something interesting here. And so I remember the first time I did it for a month, and I was like, I feel great. And I was just like, well, I can't do this forever. So I go back to my normal sort of mixed diet. I immediately feel not as good. I was like, well, this thing started hurting again. So I was like, I'm just going to go back to this carnivore thing. I remember my wife at the time was telling me, how long are you going to do this for? I said, I don't know. Let me see if I can do it for a couple months, see what happens. I ended up doing it for a year. And this is when, I was on, at the time, Twitter. And I was kind of talking about this, kind of half joking about it. Like, hey, I know I'm going to die of heart disease. I'm going to get scurvy. But I convinced 100 people to do it for 90 days. And we tracked all their data. And we called it this, people saying, well, this is an N=1 experiment, doesn't matter. We called it N=many. And we had a little website. People uploaded their data. And, all these people are getting good results. You know, the average person lost something like 30 pounds in 90 days. Their digestion got better, their mood got better, their sleep got better. Everything we could assess, you know, basically for free, because all kind of like self-reported. So it's kind of like, is that real or not? But that happened. And then, of course, I guess Rogan got wind of this somehow, and he brought me on in 2017. And, you know, I didn't really appreciate the impact that his podcast had, even back in 2017. And that got me blown up a little bit. And then, of course, I got all these wacky vegans start attacking me like, oh, you're this evil guy that eats meat. And I was like, this is just goofy. And I didn't really care. I was like, I'm not really here to
That's
push
not the
anything.
purpose of
I'm
why
just
you're
saying, look,
doing
this
it.
is interesting. It seems to be helping people. So, you know, I kind of roll with that a couple of years and start collecting data, collecting, you know, anecdotes on, I mean, what turned out to be thousands and thousands of people, putting all these really interesting medical conditions into full remission, like autoimmune disease, like Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, mental health disorder. I mean, guys with PTSD, health improved significantly. And I think that's something that I think now we come to appreciate, how nutrition does impact our mental health. I mean, there's a lot of people who used to say 10 years ago, no, it's all about cognitive behavioral therapy and, you know, taking these SSRIs. And it's like, wait a minute, what if we feed the brain appropriately and stop feeding ourselves garbage? That does have an impact. And I'm sure you've probably seen that and
100%.
probably aware of that. So
it's amazing. And I want you to continue. But to me, there's two things that I notice right away, that if I'm not eating what I call clean, if I'm not eating clean and I'm not training, the body aches start to come back and the sleep starts to get erratic. Everything that clean nutrition and training, if you don't do it, it comes back fast.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I'm sorry, continue. I love how you're in the discovery mode of all this.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, over the years, I mean, and because I've interviewed probably at least 1,000 people. I mean, just we're talking like success stories. And I started seeing, you know, obviously a lot of weight loss, a lot of people with diabetes putting in remission. We started seeing a lot of autoimmune stuff. Then we started seeing these weird things, like there's a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, right? So this is a genetic connective tissue disorder where people have really like loose, stretchy skin and their joints dislocate all the time. You know, it's a common, we see it in orthopedics quite a bit because people come with shoulder dislocations, you know, ankle dislocations and things like that. There's not really a lot of good treatment about it because it's genetic and the tissue is just too loose, right? So there was a gal, I remember the first time I heard this, she was 57. She was another physician, by the way. And she somehow went carnivore for some reason. Maybe she saw me on Rogan or something like that, tried it. And she had, so her life had been this. For the last 20 years, she would wake up every morning with 3 or 4 joints dislocated, like put her shoulder back in, put her, you know, ankle back in, put her wrist back in place. That was every day for like 20 years. She was an ER physician. So she'd go to work at the ER and about half the time her shoulder would pop out of place while she's at work. And so, wait a minute, I got to put my shoulder back. You know, so you can imagine it puts a damper in your lifestyle.
Yeah, it
right?
sure does.
So that's occurring. And, you know, she's, you know, her joints are getting beat up because they're always, you know, dislocating back before she's getting arthritis. She goes carnivore and she goes, within 1 month, my joints stop dislocating. And I'm like, well, I don't understand. I still don't understand why this happens, because this is literally a genetic connective tissue disorder. Now, I mean, I know nutrition impacts the quality of our tissues. That's clear. I think one of the reasons we see so many tendon and ligament injuries now these days in a lot of the athletes is because the diet is going to crap for a lot of them. But so she saw that completely resolved, never had another dislocation, was able to start lifting again, lost like 30 pounds. And I've seen, since that time, I've seen probably another 50 to 100 people with the same condition, same sort of result. So this is something that clearly impacts disease. Now, I will, as you mentioned, you know, I wrote the book, The Carnivore Diet. So I went on Rogan, started talking about this wacky all meat diet. It wasn't called carnivore back then. It was called zero-carb. And so a book publisher approached me and said, hey, can you write a book about this stuff? And I'm like, I don't really like writing. I'm not a writer. I hated writing in school. That was like my least favorite subject. And if I had to write an essay, I dreaded it. But I did it, and it, you know, turned out pretty well. It sold, you know, a bunch of copies. You know, it sort of coined the term carnivore, and so now we have this, you know, kind of global phenomenon where a lot of people are doing it.
It's cult-like.
Yeah. It is.
It is. I mean,
and this is a thing that kind of pains me a little bit because, you know, obviously I kind of helped set this ball in motion. But there are people that get very cult-like on this, and they're like, "Oh, you can't have a vegetable; it's going to kill you, and everything's evil." And I'm like, "Look, first and foremost, and even if you read my book, first thing I say in there, early in the book, I say humans are omnivores. We are omnivorous. I mean, you mean, you can't deny that. I mean, how many people live 100, eat an omnivorous diet? Almost all of them, right? Or most of them. Well, probably every one of them, quite honestly, throughout their life. But there are times and there are benefits to a carnivorous diet, particularly when it comes to health issues, right? And I still maintain that's the thing to do. Even though myself, I pretty much eat a carnivorous diet almost all the time. Every once in a while I'll deviate from that, but I mean, for me, it makes me feel better. I mean, this is why we can talk about the performance side, because I know that's something that we want to talk about here. But for me, it helps me perform better. And I know there's advantages to carbohydrates when it comes to certain performance aspects, but I mean, there's also a bit of an inflammatory side, and I think there's a trade-off. And I think particularly as an older athlete, you have to be cognizant. There's an age where your carbohydrate tolerance sort of diminishes, and its benefit sort of, that balance is in the favor of maybe lower carbohydrates.
I agree 100%. The one thing in messing with nutrition, the one thing I've noticed with carbohydrates, first of all, the biggest myth, and please correct me if I'm off here, is when I have gone lean into a carnivore mode, I do minimize carbohydrates, of course, but then when I feed myself carbohydrates, I'm looking to do something specific. And I do understand the aspect of brain health with it too. But I'm also looking for sometimes like the full muscle bellies and things like that, just to have more of an appearance than a performance. The biggest myth I know that people always hit me up with is if you don't have carbs before performance, and I don't think they understand, depending on the activity you're doing, specifically short duration power moves, sprint like things, powerlifting, carbs don't even come in the process. They're not even in the play. So can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some evolution of thought on that. And so certainly carbs are conditionally beneficial. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I think a lot of people, particularly depending upon the sport, we know that some of the evidence coming out there is it's not so much about muscle glycogen. It probably tends to more impact performance. And I know you were talking about a guest about, the brain, how the brain regulates our performance, and it shuts us down. It protects us. A guy named Tim Noakes, who's one of the leading, sports scientists in the world, talks about the central governor theory, that it's the brain that actually limits our performance and not the body. And we know that blood glucose, which is impacted by carbohydrates clearly, is probably the performance regulator. And so what happens is, particularly with, like if I'm doing a power clean, I mean, I don't what that lasts a second. I don't need carbs to do 1 second of activity, right? You just wait for your ATP to regenerate, and it's all creatine phosphate system anyway, for the most part. So that is not really relevant. But when you start getting into like long distance cycling, if you're doing like CrossFit WODs multiple times throughout the day, these are the activities where carbohydrates tend to be beneficial. But for 99.9% of athletes on the planet, that aren't competing at the highest level, the carbohydrates are kind of like, in many ways, optional, depending on your sport. Like for weightlifting, for sprinting, like the stuff I do, concept 2 500-meter rows, power cleans, running sprints out on the track. They're kind of like, not that necessarily helpful. And as long as your blood glucose is not dipping, your performance is high. I've literally worn a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, while I'm breaking world records on a rowing machine, and I can watch what my blood glucose is. And it's like, as long as it stays above a certain level, the carbs are irrelevant from my personal physiology. And there's a lot of data coming out, guys like Andrew Kutnick and Philip Prinz and others, Tim Noakes, doing the research on this and showing that what we thought, based on the Scandinavian literature from the 1960s about carb loading and glycogen restoration performance, is being challenged now. And we're seeing that, like I said, even in my book, The Carnivore Diet, I talk about the use case for carbs. I think the best use case is in athletes peri-workout, either pre, post, or during. I think that's the best time to have them. And not all carbs are the same. I mean, there's a difference from eating a bunch of Oreos and well, I mean, that's got fat with it too, but I mean, a bunch of refined garbage and eating something that is whole unprocessed. I think that's, obviously, if you're going to eat carbs, that would be a better solution for most people, particularly non-athletes.
Right. No, and I told you off camera that I did a little test run with me to see, I entered and dabbled into the nutrition, the bodybuilding world, which, without going into that, we know what it does to the body. I mean, you're going for appearance versus performance, and I'm a performance athlete. So it was something very short-lived with me. I just wanted to achieve an objective. But the one thing I absolutely notice with me is exactly what you're saying. If I am doing a hyper focused power event, I don't need carbs, but I do know if I'm going out and I'm gonna strap a weight vest on and go walk 12 miles, and those type, they definitely help my body.
Yeah, I think anything over an hour,
Yeah.
certainly anything over 2 hours for sure. I think carbohydrates make sense. And this is why you probably will never see a very low carb, zero carb athlete achieve a sub 2 hour marathon. I mean, this is why all the Kenyans are out there and they're high carb athletes. And again, I think depends on who you are, what your goals are, and what sports you're participating in. Like I said, personally, I'm not a big fan of ultra endurance, I think it's important to be cardiovascularly fit, but I mean, if you're grinding and putting in 100 miles a week on there may be some diminishing return. You're probably sacrificing in other areas.
Oh yeah. And I mean, as a orthopedic surgeon and with your knowledge on nutrition and fitness, I'll even go further. I mean, CrossFit was designed for athletes, not soccer moms. And I'm sure in everybody I've talked to in your field that the amount of injuries that come out of it from people not being warmed up, being trained, and then going out and performing a ballistic exercise. But if you put that all aside and the person is conditioned and trained, and again, we're talking nutrition here, it's a moot point. The carbs and all that don't even come in or weigh into it.
Well, let me just talk about from the injury standpoint. As an orthopedic surgeon, the most common athlete that I saw getting injured was a couch potato. I mean, I got to tell you, that is worse, being sedentary. This is where your tendons, your cartilage just falls apart because it's one of those use it or lose it things. If you do not see stresses across those tissues, they just degrade, they atrophy, they fall away. And then, like I said, I would tend probably 20 to 1 when I see sedentary people getting surgeries versus athletes. Now, of course, as an athlete, you can injure yourself. And you're absolutely right. When you take someone who has been relatively sedentary and you subject their tendons to jumping and sprinting and hopping and ballistic activities, they're going to get injured. And so it's not that those activities are necessarily bad. I think they're quite good, quite honestly. I think we should be doing them, but you have to sort of work your way into that. And so it's like, you might start out with some light, extensive plyometrics, and you start doing these various isometric type things so you can develop the tendon capacity so that then when you are 50 and 60, you can get out there and jump and hop and skip and bound and do power cleans and snatches and all the things that we know are beneficial. I mean, I think they're clearly good activities to be at. And I think it's important, this concept of, maintaining a high ceiling, because what happens with most people is, and this is a funny thing. I always get in these arguments with these people, these so-called chill maxers, these people that tell me, oh, you shouldn't be working out hard because you're old. And I'm like, F that. I'm like, that is the stupidest thing you could tell anybody. Even as doctors that tell people, oh, you're getting old, you need to take it back. That is horrible advice. What you should be telling people is you need to get to a level where you can actively, intensely exercise because it's going to preserve your quality of life, probably your quantity of life, but certainly the quality. We know that. But we have these people that'll say, well, if you look at all the 100-year-old people that are around today, none of those guys were hard exercisers. But then you go back and you say, well, wait a minute. When did these people grow up? They grew up in the 1920s when they're born. No one was exercising back then. We didn't start to see people lifting weights with any sort of, on a population scale until at least the 70s when Schwarzenegger and those guys started coming out there. So before that, 1940s, 50s, 60s, none of those people ever really had much exercise. Maybe a few of them might have ran a little bit. Jogging kind of started in the 60s. So it's only right now where we're seeing these guys hit 70s and 80s that, the 70s, like Schwarzenegger and Stallone and those guys. And, if you look at it, and you can find guys on, like yourself and others, not that you're 80 yet, but I mean, I am sure when you're 80, you'll be one of those guys that's just getting after it, staying strong, staying fit. These are the people that are going to likely live the longest. They're certainly going to live with the highest level of function and quality. And I think as we start to see this new age of people that have actually exercised their whole life, we're going to see different outcomes. And in fact, all the scientific literature that we know on that shows that at least moderate intense exercise promotes longevity. So does intense exercise, but intense exercise has the additional benefit of keeping your functional capacity high. And if I can run whatever a sub 13-second 100-meter dash at 60 years of age, I damn sure are going to be walking easy at 70.
Right.
But you got people that all they do is walk, and you start seeing them by 70, they're slowing down. They can barely walk. So you got to keep that capacity very high, and you got to touch it pretty frequently. So I'm a big proponent of high capacity, high intense stuff done frequently, but with relatively small volume. I think the volume is the key there, because you overload the volume, then you start breaking down. But if you just, like for instance, when I go out and do sprints, I might do 240s twice a week. I mean, that's it. So that's and it probably takes me 40 yards to get to max velocity. So I'm probably touching max velocity for a total of 4 seconds a week, right? When it's all said and done.
Right.
And that's all you need. That's all you need to maintain that capacity.
Now, we were talking, you said you listened to the podcast with Pat McNamara on here, same age as me. He's 60, same age as us. One of the biggest things, and again, I don't mean to slam the Instagram people, but I will to an extent, is you've got all these guys out there now that are talking about longevity, and they're in their 40s. I'm here to tell you, unless you're sitting in our seat and you're in your late 50s and 60s, those guys haven't even gone through their second metabolic change yet. They don't even understand the injuries starting to come into play and how you have to keep training and keep pushing. I think the only way you can speak on that is from experience, and you can. You're 59, you're still doing it, and you're actually someone that is trained in it. Whereas it to me, it's my passion, it's my hobby. But what you just said is exactly right. At 60 years old, I belong to 3 different fitness gyms in Virginia Beach, and I can go into any of the 3 of them and run with any 30-year-old right now. I think it's because of a lifelong athletic conditioning. One of the best things, and this happens, and I guarantee it happens to you. I had a dude come up to me last week in the gym, and he's like, and I forget what I was doing, and he's like, "Man, that's impressive." He goes, "But when you get to my age, you won't be able to do that." And I looked at him. I said, "Well, how old are you, brother?" And he goes, "Well, I'm 52." I said, "Well, I'm 60."
Yeah.
And the guy just looked at me and walked away. But my point being is that I may not look 60, and I definitely don't train like I'm 60, but I'm going to look like this when I'm 70. And I think the function of it is, I call it, everybody talks about this nutritional triad. And I think I even saw you kind of beating it up on Instagram one time. Everybody wants to talk about, your nutrition and your training and your rest. I think it's a diamond. I think it's your nutrition and your training and your rest, but at the top is your mindset. I think without the mindset to drive, push, wake up every day, train, stay on diet. Kind of talk about that as a guy at 59, that you're still out doing sprints. You're still pushing yourself. You just set a world record concept too. I mean, how do people at our age get out of bed and keep that edge?
Yeah, I mean, and I agree wholeheartedly about the mindset aspect. In fact, what I do, because I deal with a lot of sick people as a physician still. So my, sort of primary job at this point is taking sick and diseased people and getting them, out of that situation. And again, obviously, once you become healthy, then the sort of the next level is to become fit, vigorous, athletic, and so on and so forth. And so the mindset, and I tell these people, hey, you just have to. You refuse to accept anything less than success. I mean, it's not even an option for you. You get it done. You figure out how to make it happen. And I think that is something you just have to, you have to just will it into existence. And then obviously success breeds success over time. When you overcome some sort of obstacle, you think, well, I've done it before, I can continue to do it. So, I mean, it's good to start that habit as a young person. And again, I've got another book coming out talking about generational health and how we instill this onto our children. And again, a lot of times, I mean, we're heading into a society where, potentially robots are doing everything for us. So what are we going to sit around and watch video games all day? I mean,
Right.
it's like the really, kind of a sort of scary time potentially for that. But the mindset, yeah, I mean, that, again, going back to Tim Noakes' central governor model, your mind tells you when you're quit, but it also tells you when to get started. And as you know, I rarely get motivated to go to the gym. I mean, I'm rarely like, oh, I'm so excited to work out. Most of the time, I'm like, well, shit, I'm just going to go do it. And I almost always am very happy that I did that. And I almost always, have good experiences in there. Every once in a while, you have to shut it down because you just don't feel it. But for the most part, it's just sort of like, it's like brushing your teeth. It's like, hey,
Part of your
let's
day.
do it. It's a part of my day. So I heard you talking to one of the other guests about, yeah, you don't need these extensive layoff periods of do one hard workout and recover for a week. That's nonsense as far as I'm concerned. I think you should train with intensity frequently. Again, volume you have to manage, but again, this whole train like an old guy is BS. When these people talk about this sort of survival bias, they look at these old people and they're like, oh, look at these people they're in Italy walking around, these old guys, and all they do is walk around and drink coffee in the cafes and they're living along. That's what I want to do. If they think that's the key to longevity because this is what old people do. I said, I welcome you to go walk into any nursing home. You're going to see a bunch of 90-year-olds and 100-year-olds sitting there in a wheelchair with a piss-soaked diaper. Maybe that's the key to longevity. We should sit around in a piss-soaked diaper. It's survival bias. The reality is you have to get after it. You have to stay mentally locked in. And the other thing is when your physical being decays, so does your mind. And that's a death spiral there. I mean,
Right.
Once you start losing that will to fight, I mean, you're basically just waiting to die. I mean, and you see people in their 30s that are like that. I mean, they're like dead at 30. They don't get buried till they're 70, but they're just waiting their time, And so I think you have to, because so many old people become irrelevant. You see it happen all the time. You got, there's grandma, you put her in the corner, pet her on the head like she's a cat or something like that. You've got to stay physically vigorous. And I think, I can't remember, it was Pat McNamara or one of your other guests was talking about, you still want to be a kick-ass, someone that people are concerned about. You want to be present in a room where they're like, I actually care about this guy. He's relevant. And so when you become physically diminished as you get older, you become basically irrelevant. And then you lose your purpose. And then you're waiting to die at that point.
It's really a great point. I think that people that start to use age, not their ability, as their reason not to continue, that's when they start giving up and start failing. One of the things, just to go back to the carnivore diet, I was having a discussion with somebody, and this is before I even had you locked as a guest, and they referenced the carnivore diet as a fad diet, and I really lost my composure on them. I'm like, it's the original fad diet.
Yeah.
It is not a fad diet. It's the original diet. It's what has been on this planet longer than most of us can even talk about. And it's kind of funny because I'm that guy, and anybody that's been around me knows, and we're old enough to know, oh, butter's bad for you, have margarine. Oh, red meat's bad for you. All this shit that's bad. We're going to go through cycles where everybody talks about what's bad for you. I'm the guy that's always said, I eat red meat 2 to 3 times a day, and look at me. And now what's the biggest craze going on right now? The biggest craze in nutrition, if you're paying attention, is everybody's talking about, why are you taking 5 grams of creatine phosphate when you should be at 25 or 30? What they're not talking about is all that creatine that is in that red meat, that delicious, actual natural food. Because to me, again, a supplement is exactly that. A supplement is to bridge the gap that you're not getting in nutrition. So, I mean, anything you want to talk about on that?
Yeah, I mean, you probably remember when creatine first hit the scene. I think it was in the late '80s, as I recall. I remember I was active duty military at the time, and I remember I was bench pressing, and I was like 225. I could hit like 18 reps. I was like stuck at that, and then I started taking creatine, and I got it up to I was hit 24 reps. I was like, damn, this is actually effective, right? And I don't remember what my diet was. It was probably just a standard mixed diet at the time. And then, for probably 20, 30 years, it was just thought as an athletic supplement. And it's been well studied. It's been well documented. It's been very effective as an athletic, ergogenic aid. Then recently they started doing some research and they found it's got some cardioprotective effects. It's got some mental health effects. But the problem is the people, like they're giving it to these old demented people, right? Or these people that are cognitively impaired. And the problem is these people they've lived in this era of restricting fat, restricting red meat for decades. So their creatine stores in their body have been depleted. So yes, when you start feeding them, the sorely missed nutrients, they start to get better. But the reality is you do tend to accumulate that if you eat red meat every single day. Like for me to take creatine, I eat 2 to 3 pounds of red meat every day, probably similar to something like you do. I don't really need a lot of creatine. I don't take it. I don't feel that it would give me any benefit. I have taken it over the years, but at this point, if you're a vegetarian or God forbid a vegan, creatine is something you better be taking, because it's something that clearly has a benefit to you. But yeah, I mean, if your diet is, providing nutrition, which is what it should be, and this is what humans survived on for, since the beginning of time. And I look at, red meat as, I've operated on a lot of human beings. We are made out of red meat. I can tell you, when you cut a human open, they're red meat animals, right?
Right.
And so, and it's sort of simplistic and sort of an inelegant way to look at this. But, if you think about, like, if I were to take, if I wanted to build a brick house and I had a pile of bricks over here and then a bunch of straw and mud over here, which is going to be the more efficient way to do it?
Right.
You take the pile of bricks. And so we are, ultimately all made out of animal cells. All the nutrients, all the nutrition, all the structural components that are in animal cells are the exact same things we need. So at the very simplest form, that is, nourishment. Now, can you get additional, conditional benefits from these other foods? Clearly, yes, you do. Are they necessary? Are they all, I think meat is the meat of the meal. I mean, it's
right.
I think that phraseology is there for a reason. And we've seen that with the recent US dietary guidelines. I'm sure you've seen those come out. And in part, that has to do with the fact that a lot of people are understanding through, thankfully, some of these people that have been talking about carnivore for a while, that red meat is not the enemy. It's all the ultra processed garbage that we've been poisoning ourselves with for the last 50 years. And that, RFK, Bobby Kennedy Jr. is saying, hey, I'm basically on a carnivore diet. And so that, when you look at those US dietary guidelines, it's a pyramid that has been flipped upside down. That was done intentionally. That visual graphic was there to send a message. And the first thing you see on that guy, on that thing on the top left, you read a page, left to right, top to bottom, is a big old ribeye steak.
That's right.
So it's like, that was done intentionally. I know it was. And I've talked to some of the guys that wrote those guidelines. And so they're very cognizant of the messaging that's going out and the forward facing to the consumer, is that red meat is back on the menu. It's kind of like I don't know if you've ever seen The Lord of the Rings, where the orcs are like, look, boys, meat's back on the menu type thing. Yeah. Right. So that thing is being realized. And so I think the unfortunate thing has been politicized. It's just like, now it's like, if you eat red meat, you're you're a right-wing crazy and you're a racist and you're a fat, whatever. And if you're a vegan, you're a pacifist, nice.
We call that white noise.
It's just stupid. It's stupidity. I mean, it's like, all humans need good nutrition. I mean, right. I hope that hopefully, because I try not to get into the politics stuff, because I'm like, I'd like everyone to be healthy, at the end of the day, because, the other thing is we have as we touched on, the mental health disease in this country is so prevalent. 1 out of every 4 or 5 people is diagnosed with a mental health disorder, whether it's depression, anxiety, ADHD, whatever it might be. When you mix a crowd of people and every 4th person you run into has got something wrong with their brain, that's a recipe for violence, aggression, anxiety, bad things happening. So as a society, we need to fix our brains collectively, and nutrition is a big part of that.
Nutrition is a huge part of it, right? Hey, this is Bruno, and you've been watching the Hot Wash by Born Primitive Tactical. Please don't forget to like and subscribe our podcast, and thanks for watching. Now back to the podcast. 2 things I really want to talk about why I have you here, and it's because of your expertise. So in relation to the carnivore diet, nutrition, can you talk about vegetables, the effect on the body, and can you talk about salt?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, as I said, humans are, in my view, omnivorous. There are some people that make the argument that we're what's called a facultative carnivore, which means we thrive on meat. And I think that is also true. I think those are not mutually exclusive statements. I think vegetables are considered, by many people, that is the thing. That is the pinnacle of nutrition, is eating a vegetable, right? Because, it's got all these, phytonutrients in there. It's got this healthy fiber, and it's not junk food. And, they don't really taste very good. And you got to learn to like them. Anyways, but vegetables, I think are, I would say are probably for most people neutral. I mean, I think they the reason they are beneficial for many people is, and this also goes to fiber, is that it provides a level of fullness. You use a roughage in there, and so you don't have room to eat other stuff. And yes, there are some various vitamins and minerals within vegetables, but they're hard to access. They're if you compare the vitamins and minerals that are found in animal products versus vegetable products, the bioavailability is not even close. I mean, in some cases it's 100-fold more, depending on the nutrient. And so the vegetation basically is, causing weight loss. Like if you look at people that go on plant-based diet, what's the classic stereotype for someone on a all plant diet? Skinny, right? Skinny. Why is that? Because
they lose muscle too.
Well,
you see
it's true, right? They do get skinny, and the reason is because they, instead of feeding their body, they're basically feeding the damn toilet. I mean, they're literally pooping out significant percentages of that indigestible roughage that they can't absorb any nutrition from. So yes, it's a good way to lose weight, and skinny people compared to fat people tend to have better health outcomes, right? Now, what if we put in people that are lean and have a decent amount of muscle mass on there? And I suspect that is going to be the group that's going to ultimately perform the best. And I think those are the people that, the satiety you get from eating a steak is a different sort of satiety than you get from eating vegetation in many ways. I can eat, 16-ounce ribeye and half a dozen eggs, and I'm full, and I don't need to eat until I might only eat one other meal that day, But if I'm on and I've talked to many former vegetarians and vegans, and the one comment they have fairly commonly was, I was hungry all the time. So I was constantly eating, constantly feeding myself. So again, I think for most people, if you're looking at the general audience here, eat your vegetables. Do what Hulk Hogan says, pray, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, whatever. It's fine. If you have a disease, an autoimmune disease, a gut issue, then you start looking at those things. And this is what I see on literally a daily basis. People with IBS, which is now about 20% of the US population. IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, is basically you're eating their own damn food. I mean, that's what they should rename it, honestly. They put a name. Actually, half the diseases out there should just be named you're eating their own damn food, quite honestly. They just put these names on there for a constellation of symptoms. But what we see is when people reduce the fiber, the vegetation in their diet, their gut often improves in health. And it's just like, it can be a gut irritant for a lot of people. A lot of times fiber becomes a gut irritant. And it's just like, when you're a kid, you fell down, you scrape your knee, mom puts a Band-Aid on it, you don't crash your bike for a couple of days, it heals up. If you've got an irritated gut and you keep pouring irritants on it, it's just never going to heal. So I see this, and I know it sounds crazy, that people that were already on healthy diets, I mean, these people are eating clean. They're not eating processed food. They're eating paleo diet. They're eating a ketogenic diet. They're eating a diet that doesn't have garbage, and they remove the vegetables, and their symptoms get better. Not everybody, but for many of them. So we have to at least consider the possibility that for some people, vegetables are a net negative. Now, I never liked them as a kid. I never liked vegetables. I'll tell you a funny story. When I was a kid, I moved from Indiana down to Texas, right? I grew up in the Midwest eating Midwestern food. I get down to Texas, and then I run into this Tex-Mex stuff, right? So Tex-Mex food, tacos, burritos, fajitas. And I hated onions. I hated tomatoes. I hated peppers. And that's all over that stuff. So I was like, oh, I don't want to. I was like, always no. I'd get fajita meat, pick the meat out. So I'm down, and I did a podcast with the wrestler Steve Austin a few years back, and he's from Edna, Texas. And so I was telling my story from Edna. So I was at the University of Texas in Austin, and we were out, doing we were drinking, doing stupid college stuff. And there's a guy down in his name was Chuck. I forget his last name. He had a rice farm down in Edna, Texas, and we drive down there at like 10 o'clock at night. Too many beers in our that we had. Get there, and one of the guys, a farmhand, comes in with some tamales. And I'd never had a tamale before. I was probably 20 years old or something, like 21 years old. Yeah, I think something like that. And he goes, here, I want you to eat this tamale. He's handing them out. And I was like, oh, Mexican food, no thanks. I'm like, no. And he'd been drinking. We'd all been drinking. So he pulls out a pistol, points at me. Let me tell you, that was a good tamale, man. Yeah, but I just never liked vegetables my whole life. I remember my dad, and they would sit there and make me eat them as a kid. And I remember sitting at a table for 3-4 hours, like I just finally gag it down. And I remember talking to my dad, like when he was like 70, and I was asking him about that, and he goes, "Yeah, I never really liked them either." And I was like, "Well, what the hell did you make me eat them for, Dad?" He goes, "Well, that's what you're supposed to do as a parent." So we've been taught that we have to eat our vegetable, and I think honestly, I just think that. So I would say that if something displaces meat from the diet, is a net negative. If something displaces junk food from the diet, that's a net positive. And I think vegetables are in the middle there, because if you're eating broccoli and cauliflower and carrots and peas rather than Twinkies and donuts, good for you. That's going to be a net improvement.
Gotcha. It's funny. One of the comments you made, there's a couple guys in here, Guy Colby and Aaron Snyder, our lead hunter. Every time we all go out together as a group, when we order our food, the waitresses look at us like, we got something growing out of our forehead because I'll walk in and typically for me, I'll be like, yeah, I want the 12-ounce sirloin. I want 6 eggs and I want an avocado. And she'll look at me like, is that for 3 of you? I'm like, no, that's my breakfast. But they're not conditioned for it. And, you just literally said, I'll do a ribeye and I'll do a half dozen eggs. I'm like, perfect meal to me. I do want a little avocado in there because I like that little bit of fat, but man, let's go.
Yeah.
So, what about salt? I mean, we're both here sitting there drinking Elements. No, shout out to those guys because I actually like it. I've always been a salt guy. I've always known the benefits of salt. I've known the history of salt. Salt used to be money back in the day.
That's where the word salary comes from.
That's right. But to me, I actually regulate how much I have. We actually have the Elements now that have it's down to 500 instead of 1,000. But I noticed one thing with me, and I drink a lot of water during the day, and I drink my salt. My performance goes way up. I noticed that my body, I digest better, I perform better. Everything has seemed to when I stay on the salt. And what I used to do before Element came out, my morning potion used to be half a lemon and then some Himalayan salt to kind of reset the pH in my body, put some fluid in my body, and then get some salt going. Now, because I have this midday, I actually have swapped the salt out for a local honey, get a little more energy out of it and stuff like that. But can you kind of talk the whole salt piece and just
so I mean, we see these like proclamation from like the World Health Organization will say that salt intake is associated with poor health outcomes, and the reality is it's not so much the salt intake. Well, there's two stories here. So most of the salt that we consume as human beings these days is coming in the form of ultra processed food. If you look at any, whether it's potato chips, whether it's pretzels, whether it's bread, whether it's canned soup, that's where most of the sodium's
crazy.
So the sodium in there is significant. And so it's hard to tease that out. Like a high salt diet is in general a high processed food diet. So the health outcomes, I think, are mostly probably confounded by that significantly. The other thing is when it comes to things like hypertension, so high blood pressure, we know that sodium retention leads to that. So what happens is when we consume a diet that drives our insulin up, our kidneys will hang on to more salt. We'll have more fluid in our blood vessels that leads to hypertension, which has all kinds of negative effects for heart disease and stroke and just mortality in general. So what the reality I think is for many people is it's not the salt consumption. It's it's what's associated with it, and it's how how your kidneys handle the salt. And if you are in a chronically hyperinsulinemic state, that is to say you're eating a bunch of refined carbohydrates and your insulin levels are super high, you're going to retain more sodium. So that sort of cohort of people is different than someone who is lean, not eating a bunch of trash, and then consuming salt from non-refined sources. So I think the salt, and you're right about the performance. One thing we do know, and there's a number of athletic studies that talk about hydration, and particularly when it comes to like lifting and stuff like that. When your muscles are more hydrated, you're just stronger. They're better contractile properties, and so you might find it like what I do is I know when I'm going to do a workout, I will usually have an Element or something similar. Half hour, 45 minutes prior, there's a chance to absorb. I usually have a better workout with that. And then that sort of offsets the low carb, because one thing that we do know that carbohydrates do is, again, they raise your insulin a little bit. They cause you to retain more salt. So you end up a little bit more, you feel a little bigger.
Right.
Your muscles are filled out a little bit. It's not glycogen. It's more the water that's associated with why you get that pump. And so you can hack that with salt in a low carb situation. So I think it's important. Now there are people that are carnivore people that will eat no salt, which is interesting. I mean, meat has salt in it.
Right.
Blood is salty, right?
Right.
And not that meat has blood in it because it's been hung, but still the tissue has salt in there. And it's about, it's isoosmotic, has the same concentration of sodium as does seawater generally, because theoretically we all came from the sea and we kind of maintained that sort of basic electrolyte balance, all the way through all these creatures. So yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important. We have to have it. I think it's been demonized unfairly due to the fact of the associations with blood pressure and the fact that we get most of our salt from garbage.
Yeah, and the other thing is too is on average, the general person is not very fit or very healthy, especially in today's society. We see that. You see all the running jokes about, I take a picture of the beach 30 years ago and take a picture of the beach now. People are getting heavier, more out of shape, which is crazy because there's so many more distinct separations now because you have some uber elite athletes.
Right.
There are more sporting events and ways to, Concept 2 and things like that exist now that never existed before, but you have the haves and the have-nots. I have a hard time, and I'm infinitely known on this podcast for what's known as fat shaming, but I have a hard time respecting somebody that doesn't even respect their own body. I really do. And I come from a culture, 40 years in my community, where guys respected their body, and if anything, they were just broken from what we did. But when you get out and you're in general public, who do I hang out with? I hang out with soft operators and gym people.
Yeah.
So then when I get away from people that are those culture and I'm with normal people that don't train, I feel like I'm looking down on them. I actually am, because I'm like, how do you disrespect your body this much? And are you not in it? And I just can't even correlate to it. And my listeners are understanding what I'm saying, but for something that you're saying with the nutrition, the training and stuff like that, I say, I don't care if you're 55 and you've never done it. It's never too late to start. It is. Now, are you going to have the same results? Hell no. We know that. You and I have been doing this a lifetime. There's nobody that's going to start at age 45 and look like you and I do at 60. But I will tell you, somebody that starts at 45 is going to be in a way better position at 70 than if they don't start.
Yeah, I mean, the best time to start was yesterday, obviously. And, again, there's nothing that's going to, like people ask me what I do. I said, well, let's wind back that I've got 45 years of weightlifting behind me. I mean, that's, it's not because I eat a carnivore diet. I'll be specific about that, because people are trying to imply that I'm trying to say that the only reason I'm in shape is because I eat carnivore. That's nonsense. The only reason I'm in shape is because I prioritize that my entire life. And I'm never going to stop doing that. Knock on wood, God forbid something happens. But so, I mean, it's yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, there are studies in 90-year-olds, scientific studies showing that they can significantly put on muscle if they start training. So, I mean, it's your muscles still respond. Now, again, you might be dealing with joint pain and different things and motivation, energy issues, but muscle still responds throughout your life. Man, woman, male, female, older, younger, it doesn't really matter. And this is the thing, like with cartilage, because this is a limiting factor for a lot of people. I got no cartilage in my knee. I can't run sprints. That may be true. However, and it's interesting, they're talking about, there's some studies out there saying they might be able to regrow cartilage in the near future.
Based on in Europe right now.
It's in mice. So that's maybe a 20-year wait on that. So I wouldn't be too crazy about that yet. But, I remember looking into this decades ago, and, with regard to cartilage, because the cartilage behind the kneecap, the patella, is the thickest cartilage in our body. It's about 4 millimeters thick on average, which is not very much, but that's, your cartilage isn't very thick. It's a millimeter thick in a lot of places. And there was a study on German weightlifters, Olympic lifters. What they saw is those people had significantly, like 2 millimeters more of cartilage underneath. Why was that? Because they were experiencing that stress. And so the other thing that's interesting is, like, when I was, doing all these orthopedic surgeries, I put cameras in people's knees all the time. And, one of the first things you talk about any orthopedic surgeon, you'll see is the very back of the knee. Like when you get your camera, you go way, way in the back of the knee. That's often where we see wear. It's almost one of the first places wear shows up. And why is that? It's because that's where the knee is in contact in really deep flexion. And it's not because deep flexion is harmful. It's because no one gets there. No one is squatting down low. And particularly with stress, it's like when you see some of these Asian populations where everybody's squatting in the rice fields or stuff like that, they have lower rates of arthritis because that cartilage is still seeing stress. So you want to stress those tissues. Same thing with your ligaments and your tendons. They need to stress Just like your bones, everybody knows if you don't do weight bearing exercise, what happens to your bones? They get soft and they break.
They get soft and they break.
Same thing with your cartilage, same with your tendons. We need to be stressing this. And so this whole low impact aerobics phase, craze, it still is affecting a lot of people. I see people telling me, oh, I got a rebounder because I'm bouncing around. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. You're getting a little blood flow, but it's not doing much for your joints. Now, again, not everybody can jump off that table and land on the ground comfortably. I can do it because I do it all the time. I build up my tendon capacities where I can jump up and down and do hurdle hops and all those things. And I guarantee that if I were to MRI my body, I'd have arthritis in my ankles, my knees, my hips, my low back. I know it's there, but I'm functionally able to do a lot of different things because I maintain those capacities. I maintain the muscles around the joints. The muscles are secondary stabilizers of the joint. They're dynamic stabilizers. And so the best thing you can do is be strong. Your joints can be strong. And in fact, the data on injury prevention shows that more so than proprioceptive training, more so than stretching, is strength training. So get strong, get your joints strong. You'll be able to handle a hell of a lot more. Expose them, expose those joints to, intense things. Again, there's exceptions with injuries in here, but I mean, for the average person, you should be experiencing some stress.
No, I agree. So one of the questions I have to you is, we have a lot of listeners and it's a full range of age. And most of the people listening are either into human performance or military law enforcement type lifestyle. A message to male, female out there, if you could influence them to look into anything and you had a brief time to tell them, what would your message be? Because what I think is really important is you've made it very clear in here. Something that I really wanted to hear is that the performance, you're feeding the performance. It's not the other way around. You don't generate speed and muscle by the food. The food feeds the speed and muscle from training. So, I mean, just something you could pass on to them that they may take as pearls of wisdom that I'd love the listener to kind of take away and say, hey, look, this is coming from a guy that you thought he was on here to talk about just eating red meat, but where red meat really fits.
Yeah. I mean, your diet should support your function. I mean, I don't care what your diet is. I mean, for a lot of people, carnivore diet works great. And I'm a big proponent of that. I think it's wonderful for people that are diseased and sick. And I think if you're dealing with a disease or sickness, you are empowered. Don't outsource that to someone else because you got to live with the results of that 24 hours a day. So you need to take ownership of your illness and fix it mindset wise. And I can tell you, dealing with people on a daily basis, our company Rivera, we literally take people and we empower them to get healthy that way. If you get diagnosed with a chronic disease in this country, the things that the problems are, the doctor will say, why do I have this disease? Like diabetes or, depression or Crohn's disease. And they'll say, maybe it's genetic. We don't really know. You get this kind of half-ass answer, right? And the reality is there's probably a reason. You just got to figure out what that is and then take ownership of that. And then you can infect that. But I mean, what happens is, what do I do about it? Well, you just take pills for the rest of your life. And that is a awful answer, and we're getting into this age, with all the fat shots, the GLP-1s and the other drugs. And that, again, that's another whole long topic.
That's going to get real interesting, isn't it?
Well, we're going to see, obviously it's going to be a $1 trillion drug. I mean, they're going to make tremendous amount of money. They're going to get tons of people on that. Some people will be helped. A lot of people will be harmed long-term, I think. We'll see. We'll see what happens. There's already billions of dollars of lawsuits, being proposed for these things.
The GLP-1 drugs right now are like a fad. It's like,
well, I mean, I don't think they're good. I think that vein will continue. Now they're GLP-1s and now they're adding the GIP and the glucagon agonists. And so, there's all these variations that are going to occur. It's kind of funny because I remember initially when a lot of people come out and their concern was, well, they're going to lose a lot of muscle. And people say, no, it's not the drugs. Anytime you go into a deficit, you lose muscle. And I've said, well, interestingly, they're also developing drugs to counteract muscle loss, the same company. So if it's a made up problem, why are they spending millions of dollars to develop more drugs to combat that? Right. So it's like, well, you see the motivation. It's just about making a lot of money. I mean, they don't, if they could come up with a drug that you take one injection and for the rest of your life, that's not a problem. That would be a cure, right? We don't tend to do those things. We tend to just, let's develop a drug where people have to take it for the rest of their life. Although I have seen people talking about genetic modification, like a GLP-1 genetically modified type of thing, which I'm not signing up for that. I got to tell you, I'm not signing up for any gene modification stuff unless I'm, desperate and about to die, I think. But where are we going? I forgot, I kind of lost track where, but as far as, the message, yeah. So again, I think we should focus on how we measure health. If I guarantee right now, you don't know what your blood potassium level is, right? You probably don't know right now. You're right. It's probably between 3, 5, and 4.
Right.
I could guess, but you don't know it's precisely. You probably don't know what your cholesterol is right this second, right? Maybe it's 200, maybe it's 160. It's somewhere. I don't know, but you can probably tell me what you can bench right now. You can probably assess where you are. And I think from a functional standpoint, and I think Rob Wolf, credit to him, and he founded Element, one of the Element founders, said it really well when he says, how do I look? How do I feel? How do I perform? And I think those are the things that most people actually care about. And I think those are the overarching things we should emphasize. Now, yeah, I mean, there's people that'll say, oh yeah, well, there was this guy that was super fit and he dropped dead of a heart attack or he had cancer. Those things occur, but for every one of those persons, there's 100 fatsos on the couch that are developing this stuff. So yes, one of the biggest indicators of your health is how you perform. I mean, this is clear. I mean, if I were to chase anything, I might look at a waist to height measurement as a measurement, but I mean, how fast can you run 100 meters? How fast can you run a mile? How much can you deadlift? How far can you broad jump? Those types of, because if you can't broad, let's just say this hypothetical scenario. I put 100 people on the starting line, say go run 100 meters, and I clock every one of them. The fast guys, the guys can do that sub 15 second, are probably going to live longer than the ones that can't for various reasons. It doesn't matter how old they are. You know? If you can't run 100 meters in 15 seconds, you're too fat, B, you're too weak, three, you're out of shape. You got inflamed joints.
Right.
Or you're not motivated. You don't have the mindset. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into that. So these are measurements of health that I think are actually realistic. It's hard to do, and you're not going to go to the doctor's office. He's not going to put you on a 100-yard line because there's all this liability type stuff that's going on. But I mean, when you're assessing your own health, this is how I do it, rather than spending thousands and thousands of dollars on various blood tests. Just see what you can do and fix those things. If you can fix those things, all that other stuff is most likely going to fall in line for the most majority of people.
No, you're right. And it's funny. I get my blood pulled quarterly, and
how actionable is it though? I mean, maybe you take a supplement to move a blood marker around, but I mean,
well,
does it
this
impact
is something you're going to enjoy, and it's kind of funny, and it's something it's for another time, because we could probably go 2 hours on this subject. My blood is so constant that if you look at my bloods, because I am stable in my training and my nutrition, that from blood test to blood test, there's very little change except for this last one. And going through a very volatile divorce and the stress, my blood is all over the place. So literally my doctor that I work with immediately said, hey, let's talk about this. I said, let's not. This divorce is going to be settled here very soon. Let me have a month and I'll go get my blood redone. And I bet you it's right back where it's supposed to be. I'm just inducing a stressor right now that's causing a little bit of catabolic action. And I'm really not even going to look at those bloods again, because I was amazed. For a guy that can tell you plus or minus 25 points what his testosterone is going to be, what his cholesterol is going to be, what my A1C is going to be. I know my blood. I know and everything. And for it to come this far out of whack, I was like, either they took somebody else's blood or stress is a real thing.
Well, I mean, the latter is the answer to that. And it's interesting. And, you had your little diamond, I think there's about 6 things that really impact our health. I mean, I think it's our nutrition, it's our sleep, activity and exercise. I think that circadian biology is actually important. Sunlight is important there. Stress is also huge. And in fact, there are a number of studies that suggest, like when it comes to things like heart disease, stress contributes about 30% to heart disease, of all the things that impact you. And so we have this whole type A personality that you probably heard of, was coined back, I think, in the 1950s, when they looked at people that were having heart attacks. And they found that the people that were constantly stressed out were the ones who were more likely to have heart disease. And we see that after like when there's like global catastrophes, like war or something like that. heart disease rockets because the people are just stressed out enormously, and it's an independent risk factor. And so how you deal with that stress is important. Now, there's obviously good stress and bad stress. There's stress, exercise, sitting in the sauna, stuff like that. And then there's obviously divorce and losing my job and financial stress and, I'm pissed off at the neighbor type of stuff. And so you've got to figure out how to mitigate that stuff, whether it's breathing or like exercise in my saying. When I went through my divorce, jump rope, man, I was it was numbing my mind to this stuff because I was, your mind is racing.
It's your meditation.
Yeah, it's your meditation.
It's your escape. I totally get it.
So yeah, exercise is important. I mean, again, it's a non-negotiable for me, and I'm sure it is for you. But yeah, stress is incredibly important. It'll jack your numbers up. And that's like when I tell people, like, go on a diet, you're losing a bunch of weight. That is a homeostatic shock to your body. Your body is not at homeostasis. And so you got to wait till things settle down. And that's why and I like being at home. I like my routine. I like to get up, have my meal. I like to work out when I work out. I like my day. When I'm traveling like I am now, it always throws things in a whack. I don't sleep as well. It's like, it's interesting. I'm writing this new book looking at some things on sleep, and there's this thing called the first night effect, which you probably, as a military guy, you're probably very well aware of. Like marine mammals, like dolphins, can turn off half their brain. So when they sleep, the brain goes to sleep, the left side goes to sleep, the right side's open, one eye is open, one eye is closed, and they can because they're underwater, they got to be able to swim around so they can oxidate through their gills. Well, not the dolphins, but I mean a lot of the fish do that. Humans can't do that. They've done studies where they've separated the brain in half. They've done they cut through what's called a corpus callosum, and they cut the brain in half, and the human still lives, but there's still this entrained sort of response that the whole brain goes to sleep together. However, this first night effect occurs when you are sleeping in a perceived threatful environment. It's dangerous. I'm sure as a deployed guy, that was common, right? So what happens is half your brain, and I think it's usually your left hemisphere, doesn't go to quite as sleep. So you wake up like that. You hear the slightest noise and you're up because you're like, I'm not, I might be dead or something like that. So we have that phenomenon. So like anytime when I get to a new hotel, it's a weird environment, there's noises, don't sleep well. So I haven't had good sleep the last couple of nights. I was just like, I remember, I was like, damn it, so I'll be glad to get home, right?
It's crazy because the more I look into sleep, I've got a really good friend that's a firefighter, and everybody has this perception where they either do 24 or 48-hour shifts, and everybody has this perception that, they basically lift weights and are going to bed. Well, they got to be out the door in a minute. So even when they do get rest, they're not sleeping. Yeah. They're in this, like, not in the REM. They're in that light sleep. And it's crazy because they go home exhausted from the shift because they either did get called out in the night or their body was telling them it's coming any minute. And then what do the whole next day? They try and recover from that shift. Then the next day after that, they're prepping to go back to the shift, and then they're back on. All the firefighters that are career firefighters I've talked to have the same sleep disorder that guys have from deployments overseas. And it was kind of crazy until I saw that cycle firsthand. And it's, to me, the one thing I'll say as an older athlete, and we're both on the same page, if I don't get my workout in, the day's not complete. But I've finally got to a point in life where if I have had a really bad night of sleep, how I warm up for my workout determines what that workout's going to be. I may come back to 3/4 speed and decide, today's going to be a sustained workout versus today I'm doing something, with a lot of energy and a big goal in it. I think by doing that, the one thing I have done is I still stay in it. I still get what I need out of it, but I'm not getting injured. So I don't know, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, obviously, particularly at our age, injury prevention is huge because, it's just like, if you get injured and can't train for a month or two, you lose. I mean, you lose rapidly. And this is something that I think, I started lifting weights when I was 13. I have not missed more than a week in the gym my whole life. I've just never taken more than a week. Even if I'm on vacation, I might be picking up rocks and throwing rocks around or, just doing something, push-ups at the very least. So I've always done that. I mean, this is kind of this vacation. I took 2 days off because when I get to Florida tomorrow, I got my track spikes. I'm going to go run sprints on the track. I'll get a probably
Back in the game.
I'll be back in the game tomorrow. So today is my day off, and I rarely take them. And it's only generally associated with travel just because it's, it's a little less convenient. But yeah, I mean, with like for when I was doing my surgical residency, this is a similar sort of situation. I mean, we would, at its worst, we'd work 40 hours straight. We'd go home for 8 hours, come back for another 40 hours, and do that for a whole month. That was like 130 hours a week. I was just falling asleep standing up. I mean, I can remember being in the operating room as an assistant, holding sticks, holding retractors, sitting there like, falling asleep. And what we would do is we would take these what called non-penetrating towel clamps. These are little clamps. And we clamp them to our nipples through our surgical gowns. So we'd have that pain keeping us awake.
Keeping you awake
So you can stay in the game for the operating room.
I
can remember. I mean, it was just nuts. And fortunately they passed laws to restrict the hours. Now you can't work more than 80 hours a week as a surgical trainee. But we used to do that. It was borderline abusive in many ways, but that's the way you did it. That's like, the way you did it. It's like probably going through some of the special operator stuff. It's like sink or swim, you can't, we're going to weed out the weak, and that's how it was. And, I fortunately made it through. The nice thing for me is because I was 6'5", 280 when I went through, and no one messed with me.
Nobody wanted part of that.
I kind of let them know I was kind of maybe a little bit mentally unstable. Just kind of gave them a little vibe so I didn't get fucked with.
I love it. I love it.
So, but yeah, the sleep is. I mean, it's
sleep is
essential.
gold, and that's one of one of the things I'm dealing with right now is really bad tinnitus. And you're talking about the brain. Dr. Kurt Parsley was on here not too long ago.
Yeah, I know.
I love him.
He was a SEAL, former SEAL. Yeah,
smart guy, and he is convinced, and I'm going to go take a swing at it, that tinnitus is not an ear thing; it's a brain thing. And they have a guy that does a procedure where above the bridge of the nose, they put some stem cells in there, and it's supposedly got like a 97% cure rate. So to me, if you're like, Bruno, we can fix one thing on you, it would be tinnitus all the way, because they never stop banging.
Well, I will tell you, again, there are people that have gone carnivore with tinnitus, and they swear that it has significantly improved or gone away. There's a guy his name's Liam Cures Tinnitus or something. He's an Instagram guy, and he had issues with tinnitus is one of them, and he's got a collection of several hundred people. So it might be worth just trying, and maybe in conjunction with the procedure, because there's probably some level of inflammatory component to tinnitus. I mean, it's in the name, right? Anything with an itis in there is an inflammatory condition, and so but I've talked to people that just drives them nuts because you've got this constant
never stops
buzzing in your ear, and it's just like it's like So we have seen people that have gone carnivore and their tinnitus has gotten better. If you're going to do something like that, I would recommend do it for 3 months. That's a fair trial.
And just do a full assessment.
Just do a full thing for 3 months. See how it goes. You just drop the carbs for a while, load up on meat and fat, and see what happens.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it's easy. It's not a hard one. For most guys, you tell them, hey, just eat a bunch of steak and eggs all day. Most guys guys like that part. They're like, well, I don't know if I can give up the sweet potato pie and the iced tea. There's that aspect of it. But
I'm not a sweets guy, so
that's easier than
honestly. You put a nice big steak in front of me, and steak and eggs to me is like the ultimate meal.
It's awesome.
It's so easy to get along with.
I'm hungry thinking. I haven't eaten yet today, so I'm hungry thinking about it. Yeah.
So let me ask you, the new book. You want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, so it's in editing right now. It's the title. The title is going to be Generational Health. So you hear the term generational wealth, and so generational health, because I've got 4 kids, and and the data is pretty clear that healthy parents and even healthy grandparents beget healthy kids. And so how do you pass it on? What are the habits you help to foster? Obviously, being an example is the biggest thing you can do. Demonstrating data. It doesn't matter what you tell your kids. They see what you do.
Right.
There's studies out there that show that people that have had healthy grandparents tend to be fitter and have less disease. And it's not genetic. I mean, there's a genetic component, but there's this sort of lore, this concept of lore. Like if you think, well, your grandfather was whatever, like my grandfather, he was he grew up in the he was born in 1914. So he was a Golden Gloves boxer champion of Chicago. He was a scratch golfer. He was a professional baseball player. Remember my dad said, don't mess with grandpa because he's going to box, right?
Oh yeah.
And so I always had this sort of, it just affects you. It affects you. You get this family lore. This is what I come from. This is who I am. And again, it's a mindset thing.
Right.
So when you instill that mindset across generations, you get better results. And so, and there's other things you got to do. Obviously, teaching your kids how to cook and all those types of things. So I kind of get into, the development of throughout, from even selecting a mate, because that's important. If you want to have strong, healthy children and grandchildren, you got to pick the right mate to start with, right? So
that's
who you marry,
that is proven.
Who you marry is impactful. There's stuff that goes into that decision making. And then of course, pregnancy, infancy, young child, and on and all the way till you're 80. I mean, talk about all the different things that are going on health wise and how you can impact that, and the importance of that. And then again, the things I talked about, nutrition, sleep, exercise, activity, stress, circadian biology, and then having a sense of purpose. Because I mean, as someone who's older, after a point, you acquire the worldly things. You got a nice car, a nice house, you travel, whatever. But then it's like, what is the purpose? Why am I still here?
Why am I here?
And I think that is what, allows a lot of people, we see it all the time, where someone whose the only purpose is because their spouse is here, and then, she dies, and then
right after
2 months later he dies. It's because that is incredibly important.
When do you think it'll come out?
Probably late spring, maybe early summer, I'm guessing.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's in editing right now. In fact, my editor just sent me something I got to look over.
Awesome.
So
Make sure I know when it's out so we can plug it. Tell people that are listening, because guys and gals, he's got some great stuff. You know me, I'm not a big fan of Instagram, but I am for the right people. You've got some great shorts on Instagram that get rid of like some bullshit. Like, hey, I actually saw you asked me to have you the question on salt. You just talked about something I was scrolling through, and I'm like, I love this. So how can everybody find you on Instagram?
Well, Instagram is Shawn Baker 1967. So SHAWN Baker 1967. I'm on X at SBakerMD. I'm on YouTube. What's the other one? TikTok and Facebook, Shawn Baker MD.
Okay. Yeah. And then the book is The Carnivore Diet, correct?
Yeah, the original, my first book is The Carnivore Diet. The next book, which hasn't come out yet, will be titled, I believe, Generational Health.
Right. And for everybody, I looked it up real quick. It's available on Amazon right now if you want The Carnivore Diet, so you go grab it. But any final comments?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, because I know you got a lot of military folks watching this, I thank you guys for what you've done. I mean, I was part of that, but not to the extent that many of you guys were. Keep up the good work. I mean, I was just up in DC, bunch of guardsmen. I just feel so much better knowing that we have good, solid people that are still get it. I know we get criticized a lot. Military guys get criticized a lot. The U.S. gets criticized a lot through its use of the military, but it's so important. And for those that are suffering from mental health, don't doubt the impact that nutrition can have on that.
So I just want to correct you on one thing. You are part of that tribe. You did serve. You did go overseas. I stand on the belief that a veteran's a veteran. So it doesn't matter where you were on the target or supporting the target. You're still part of that tribe. So thank you for your service. And for everybody that listens to the podcast, you guys know my biggest pet peeve is military, first responders, law enforcement that are unfit for duty, because you have a bigger obligation. Your obligation is beyond you. Your obligation is to who you're serving, which is either your nation, your town, whatever it is. So there was some really good stuff put out here. And what I think is really important is we weren't just talking about getting in the gym and slinging weights. We weren't talking about shooting rifles. What he really talked about in detail was a lot of things that can cure problems that you might have. So maybe you need to do a little further research. If you do have an ailment, you do have a disease, you do have a problem, hopefully you heard the message here of what this diet can do for you. Because that was the main reason why I wanted him on here, is I did that research and I understood this is not a diet or nutrition plan for somebody trying to look good on the beach. This is a diet or nutrition plan for two things: performance and longevity. So I think it's awesome. Fully support, and I love having you on here. Cannot wait for the new book and something from the military culture. I've got to give you a coin.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, sir. It was a pleasure having you on here. I hope you guys will look and follow him on Instagram, because again, if you're looking for brevity and information on nutrition and performance, he's got it there, and it's good. I know we're all the 6-second swipe guys, and he keeps it nice and short, but it's right to the point. So everybody, thank you for turning into the Hot Wash. Make sure you like, subscribe. And by the time this episode comes out, we may be able to put out in the narrative when the actual book publication will be, because this should be coming out sometime in mid-February. So Shawn, thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Bruno. Appreciate it.
All right, brother. Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Hot Wash by Born Primitive Tactical. Don't forget to like, subscribe, or follow us at Born Primitive Tactical. I'll see you next time.